Hello, and welcome to another episode of CIO Leadership Live. I'm Mary Fran Johnson, Executive Director of CIO Programs here at IDG, and I have the privilege today to be talking with Sri Lakshmi Kohli, who is the Senior Vice President of Global IT for Align Technology Incorporated. Align is a company dedicated to delivering a beautiful smile, which is all the more noticeable in today's era of the selfie. This is a $1.7 billion California-based company which makes and markets the Invisalign system of orthodontics. They also do digital scanning systems that are used by dentists around the world. Sri is a 15-year company veteran. She's responsible for defining the technology strategy and leading all of the global consumer and enterprise and customer applications, as well as the infrastructure. Sri also runs their global program management office at Align, and she manages and executes the company's product portfolio and all of its cross-functional business programs. Most recently, she was leading the 2-year global business transformation efforts at the company, which we will be talking a bit more about. Before she came to Align in 2003, Sri held technical lead positions at Sword CT Space and Accenture. She's also a member of the Executive Advisory Board at Salesforce.com. Sri, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Mary Fran. I'm excited to be part of this conversation.
Great. Me too. I always have such a great time talking to CIOs. Oh, and I wanted to also remind our friends out who are watching this live on Twitter, we openly welcome questions from you. So if you have any interest in a follow-up question to something I'm talking to Sri about, or you just want to join the conversation, tweet on in and we will get your question put to this wonderful CIO. Let's start out talking a little bit more about the size and the scope of Align's business and its relatively dominant position in the market. Tell us a little bit more about that.
As of June, we had over 10,000 plus employees. Mm-hmm. We have about 140,000 plus doctors that are certified Invisalign providers. We have shipped to over 5.8 million patients from 100 plus countries around the world. Uh-huh. So we're really global in scale.
Yeah.
And we manufacture about 330,000 plus unique personalized aligners per day.
Wow. Well, and it's such a big business. There must be a lot of technology initiatives that are tied into this because so much of the business is inherently digital these days. Talk a little bit more about that aspect.
Right. We look at how that we're transforming a whole industry to go from conventional analog approaches to digital.
Okay.
And Align, at Align, we have a great opportunity to be in the middle of all that stuff, whether we are digitally driven restorations, delivering great treatment outcomes with digital technologies, intraoral scanners, visualization tools that help the doctors and the patients visualize what the treatment outcomes could look like, patient engagement platforms in ways the doctors have never imagined possible, social communication, and the way they can market their practices. So it's a really exciting time to be at Align where all of this is so dependent on technology. And the market opportunity is limitless in how we can make orthodontics available to the masses.
Well, that's the part that I think is so fascinating, especially to anyone who's been a parent of a child going through the whole process of getting braces, or if it's someone who, as they themselves were in their 20s and 30s and decided they finally wanted to do something to fix something about their particular smile. It seems almost, it seems so space age, the idea that you could be doing some of these procedures using an app and, using scanners that go over mobile phones. How much has the technology changed to enable this in just the last 5 years?
I think initially, for a long period of time, we spent a lot of time making sure that the clinical outcomes were good with plastic moving teeth. Mm-hmm. And that digitization and the digital approaches and making sure that the doctors were comfortable in delivering a great treatment and a good outcome for the patients, whether it's adults or teens, we spent a lot of time perfecting that. Mm-hmm. And in the last 5 years, the business models have changed. Lots of consumers are opting in the phone has become ubiquitous in our lifestyle. And the question is, how can we deliver the kind of treatments, and how can patients track their progress against, what they visually saw in the treatment in the doctor's office, or all things that have changed in the last 5 years, like even how social has changed how a doctor's practice and how a doctor markets their efforts have taken center stage.
Yes.
And the opportunity for them to deal and engage with their patients, where, you could do it over the phone, you could, you don't have to come into a doctor's office to actually look at how a treatment is progressing, or to appreciate how a doctor, by going and clicking on a social media, they're all highly relevant in the last 5 years. Mobile, social, all of that has changed the dynamic.
Well, it sounds like in the world of orthodontia and dentistry, it sounds like that particular part of the healthcare industry is a lot further ahead than we are with other parts of the healthcare industry, with medical doctors and their practices. Does it just seem that way from your perspective, or are the dentists actually striding ahead with all these technologies?
I mean, I think they understand the opportunity of what digitization can do to their own practice. And when you look at conventional analog approaches, lots of manual labor and the amount of time they spend in delivering the treatment. I mean, this millennial generation is like, I want something now, I want something fast, I want it from my couch. And the doctors are able to change how they deliver that treatment in response to how the consumers are seeking it.
Yes.
And, like our Invisalign experience centers are places where you can go experience, what an intraoral scanner can do. You no longer have to go to a doctor's office and put that bubble gum on your mouth and scoop it, and, you send it to a lab for a root canal or a crown. And, it's all 3D visual. You can sit in your chair at a doctor's practice and look at how your teeth can progress, from now, and, what a time lapse can do to how your teeth would move, and what kind of procedures you can do now to prevent some of the bad stuff from happening.
Yes.
Those are all things that, from a dentist perspective is very attractive, because they're able to do and predict things with digital that they were never allowed, or they were never able to do in their prior lives with analog.
Well, and I want to get into talking about some of the technologies that you're enabling to make this happen. But before we do that, I wanted to chat a little bit about the global expansion that Align has been going through. You had mentioned to me that...
Hold on 1 second, Mary Fran. I think my audio got cut off.
Oh, I can hear you. Are we... Can you hear me again?
Hello?
Hello, I can hear you fine.
Sorry, we had a little...
It's okay. It happens to every CIO and every tech leader at one point or another. Are you back?
I think, it's funny because I think my power goes off after a few hours or a few minutes of non-movement.
Oh,
it's an energy saving thing, and so my laptop shuts down or my monitor shuts down, so it's all coming back up. So sorry about it.
I'll have to ask you more questions that make you jumpy.
Yeah, exactly.
I wanted to get into talking about your global expansion, because you had mentioned that one of the things you've been doing, and I think this was all part of that business transformation initiative, was getting tech backbones, providing consumer and customer engagement. You've had a lot going on in IT over the last few years. So talk about it, to start with, about the global expansion and what kind of challenges that gave you that gave the IT organization.
Right. So first thing was, when it came to talent, we had to figure out what remained central versus what remained regional. Okay. And you can't sit thousands of miles away and assume that you know what a doctor in Europe or Asia wants and how they service their patients and their consumers, and also what the different go-to-market models existed. It was what works in the Americas most usually does not work in the rest of the world.
Okay.
So the first choice that we had to make from an org structure perspective is how much to centralize and regionalize. The other thing that we also had to think about a lot deeply is about technology platforms. China is a different country by itself, where the tools and technologies they use and what's available inside the firewall, the digital firewall is very different from what's available in the rest of the world. Mm-hmm. So we also had to deeply think about our technology infrastructure and say, moving to the cloud was given, just in terms of the performance that we had to drive, mm-hmm. Considering the number of doctors and the number of patients and the number of aligners we manufacture in a day, we couldn't have a centralized infrastructure somewhere in the world. Mm-hmm. So that was given. And also when we looked at platforms that allowed patient engagement, the data architecture where no matter where in the world you were, you had a similar set of data that you could collect and drive engagement with a set of algorithms. Mm-hmm. That does not change in the world. So we wanted to build out a common data infrastructure. And all of that was part of the 2-year transformation effort we laid out. When you look at enterprise systems, we didn't want a centralized global technology ERP platform, mm-hmm. but we wanted to be able to regionalize the different kinds of, billing and payments. Even though we are sort of a B2B, working with the doctors, the volume of transactions is almost like a B2C in order of millions. Mm-hmm. So we somehow had to straddle between the two and also look at where we can get global scale rapidly, which was really important to us. Mm-hmm. And, whether it was through standardization of our non-differentiating business processes or trying to understand what is our core differentiator and allowing the regional teams to be able to configure and go as fast as they wanted, the commercial teams wanted, was very important guideline to us.
Was the majority of this done essentially working with various cloud partners and on cloud platforms, or were there pieces of it that you developed in-house?
It's a mix of both. Mm-hmm. So we have, like I said, China is a beast by different country by itself, and hence, we had to come up with a different cloud platform. We use Aliyun for now. We have AWS in the rest of the world. Mm-hmm. We are on Office 365, which means we are tied to the Azure platform. We use Power BI as a visualization tool, which works really well with Azure. But all our clinical data and the algorithms that we run on, the machine learning algorithms that we run to deliver predictable outcomes are all on AWS. So we're sort of a multi-cloud hybrid platforms. Mm-hmm. And we also try to invest in platforms like Salesforce, and, we look at SAP on HANA, at some point in the cloud, and then all our websites and our core differentiating processes are built in-house on these platforms so that we get the agility we need to really differentiate ourselves from the rest of the competition.
Yes. Was there something you mentioned, you do a lot of it on centralizing globally, but then you have to have regional aspects of it. Was that a more challenging part of the rollout, figuring out exactly what you needed to do regionally versus globally?
Yeah. I wouldn't say that we've perfected that in the last 3 years. We've been in this journey for some time. Mm-hmm. Some regions are further along than others. I think the hardest part has been really the governance around how programs can run as fast as they can. Mm-hmm. Which programs, because we are still evolving our go-to-market strategies around the world. Yeah. And what I would personally like to do is that if something works in Europe, we want to make sure it works, that we can actually scale it to the Americas and Asia. Mm-hmm. And so what happens is, even though you're coming up with a regional solution, you want to make sure that there is some global element of scalability to it, right. Only because you want to sort of rinse and repeat as much as possible, but also allow for experimentation.
Yes.
So a lot of challenge actually has been in sort of the governance processes around solution design, around sprints, around how we set up delivery mechanisms. Like for us, DevOps is highly integral mm-hmm. into this transformation. And so when you look at continuous integration and continuous delivery, or continuous deployment practices, you're constantly thinking about how do I take any platform, web development, mobile development, mm-hmm. Salesforce, pick any platform or homegrown technology tools we have. It's like, what can regions change? What is still in global control? And then you put security and compliance on top of it. Like, it takes on a whole new level of governance structures that you have to put in place. and still allow for regional speed and experimentation.
Yes. Well, it's interesting you bring up governance too, because I don't tend to think of governance as something that gets associated with speed in the business. I tend to think of governance as something that is more, like meetings, almost like board of directors determining how the resources are going to get used. So to hear governance referred to in a speed and time to market fashion is a little different.
Yeah. No, so for us, governance doesn't mean that we're going to throw a bunch of processes and, make things, slow down things.
Mm-hmm.
We continuously try to figure out, okay, what programs are just keeping the lights on? If you're going to keep the lights on, you're just going to go as fast as you can.
Yeah.
You can deploy every day if you want it, or every week. And then there are lots of programs associated with growth.
Mm-hmm.
That's sort of the middle bucket where you're sort of trying to make sure that there is agility in it.
Mm-hmm.
But then because of, like I said, I have a personal interest in making sure that solutions that work in one part of the world can be tried in other areas. And so there's some structural element about how you use your platforms or global technology platforms to drive that. And so that's where we have the biggest friction around, this is a regional program. I don't have to explain to global about what we are doing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to be spending all my team in global meetings, educating the global teams.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's something that I can do regionally. But I think we've gotten over the fact, especially as we have shown credibility in how we take a regional program and expand it globally.
Mm-hmm.
We've shown the benefits of doing that. And then transformation programs on the other end are big investments where we're constantly refactoring and replatforming. And those go through more like I like to call it an agile fall model. It's sort of agility, but sort of waterfall that still goes through your security boards, your architecture review boards, and they tend to be a lot more longer term, but very important because I do believe that they are the ones that put the foundation to allow the growth programs to rapidly scale as fast as they can.
I see. I've been hearing more about that late. I've heard some CIOs call it WAGILE, where it's a combination of waterfall and agile. I like agile fall. That's another way to look at it. Let's talk also about, and behind all of this, all of these platforms, they are delivering an enormous amount of data. And you and I have talked before about how important it's been to you to democratize data science across a line. That the idea that everybody can have their own analytics working. So tell me how you think about that and the sort of challenges you've had in making it more of a reality. Kind of give me a picture of how you conceived that and got it to a point where there's satisfaction with the data analytics that are available.
Right. If you think global and regional is one layer, this whole data democratization around the business functions is about, I truly believe that, algorithms and predictive modeling and data science is not central and it's not limited to a central technology function.
Mm-hmm.
So what I keep challenging my teams is to figure out how you can create common data structures.
Okay.
What's important is to maintain data integrity and quality. And that's centralized within IT.
Mm-hmm.
And then the rest of the stuff about how the business uses the data, those algorithm specialists needs to be within the functions because they are the ones who are making it actionable day to day.
Yeah.
When we started in the beginning, it used to be that data science was all within IT. And, when we gave ideas to say a sales or marketing or an R&D or a product development team, it was more like, yeah, we hear you, we get it, but it was never made actionable. Mm-hmm. And it was also the credibility around not being in the operational part of those functions to really understand how that data can be, relevant to them. Mm-hmm. And now in the last 2 years, since we have worked with the functions to create their own data science teams, mm-hmm. so it's not like they're all hiring mathematicians and,
statisticians and all that.
Yeah, that function still is within IT.
Mm-hmm.
But how you make it actionable and how you can sort of make it relevant to someone in a meaningful manner for them to do their jobs mm-hmm. Has made a lot of progress, and we see a lot of success across different functions. And when one function catches on, the rest of the business is like, oh, I want that Power BI tool,
Yeah.
or, and then we are just focused on figuring out how, we maintain the integrity, quality, security, and how we can put governance around analytics, which is our new learning this year.
Yeah.
That, when you're using statistical tools, you want the predictability of those tools and the models that the teams come up with. Whether finance comes up with a predictive model or sales comes up with a predictive model, they are, within a good amount of percentage of accuracy that is reliable.
Yeah.
So we have just started putting together an analytics governance team, which is very different from a data governance team.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope to make a lot of progress in that part next year.
Well, I've heard other CIOs refer to that as putting essentially IT being there to keep the guardrails in place so that as the data becomes more democratized, you don't give people too much power to hurt themselves or their business efforts.
Right. Because, at the end of the day, consistency is equally important to driving that credibility.
Yes.
And, no matter what kind of modeling statistical tools you use, you want to arrive at a decent result that is almost same no matter who runs it and how they do it.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit more. I remember over the last couple of years, whenever I run different CIO events during the year, and whenever I ask my advisors about topics that we should be talking about, predictive modeling and predictive analytics often comes up. What kind of progress have you made with predictive analytics, and can you give me an example of what that looks like to your customers or to your dentists or to the end user customers of the Invisalign products?
So the last few years, we have focused a lot on predictable tooth movements that can deliver great outcomes. Because that's what a doctor cares about. At the end of the day, that's what the patient cares about. When you build visualization tools and you assume that a treatment is going to take a certain amount of time and your teeth is going to move in a certain way, can we use all of this 5.8 million plus digital dentitions that we have to be able to predict what the next set of movements are going to look like, and how you set up your treatments and how you build that into your treatment planning software. And we've made a lot of strides in really delivering that sort of predictability. So we are taking some of the learnings of that clinical predictability and modeling into business planning, sales operations, even in digital marketing, patient conversions, because we have a lot of interest in Invisalign. So the question is, how do we get the right patients or the right consumers to the right doctors with a similar treatment mindset, and they're able to convert the patient and get into Invisalign and have a very successful outcome at the end.
Well, and that is all central to the company's, to the goals of getting more of those consumers. I think we talked about there's a consumer market out there, potentially 300 million people.
Yeah.
That's a pretty big number to be going after.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and the only way we can go after that huge opportunity is through digital tools.
Yes.
In your conventional analog approaches, there was no way that you could scale to be able to deliver an outcome that both the doctor and the consumer likes with an analog approach. And so I think that's really the exciting part of being at Align and being very central to that end-to-end digitization of that experience.
All right, great. Well, and there are a couple of I want to talk a little bit about the Customer Journey Week that you spent recently, but this also seems like a good place to talk about the competitive forces that are being unleashed in your market, because it's not just Align is the biggest and the best known in your market, but there are many startups that are starting, because this digital opportunity has occurred to other companies as well. Talk a little bit about kind of that disruption, the changing competitive landscape, and how you watch it, and what are the trends about it that you're finding interesting?
Right. We stay paranoid. Even with the first mover advantage that we have, we are continuously thinking about, how do we deliver the right solutions for our doctors? The Customer Connect weeks, we do this on a regular basis, is very important. I personally go on lots of ride-alongs at regular intervals, just watching the doctors, listening to them, because they also have a great perspective of what's happening around them.
Yeah.
what kind of products are being introduced in their practices, and in the industry as a whole that drive digitization. And, we would like to be central to all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And, from a leadership position that we have, we want to make sure that we continue to stay agile. We continue to keep looking out for what emerging technologies are out there that make the patient and doctor engagement better, that drive great outcomes, that drive the end-to-end digitization, and what the rest of the competition is doing in terms of the different business models that are available. And we continue to work with the doctors to deliver that just great treatments.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was reading, there was an article on Forbes.com about Align and that whole market and the Invisalign and all the competitors coming up. And there was a statement in there that clear aligners are actually right now just 15% of the existing orthodontic appliances market, but that essentially Align holds a lion's share of that market. I expected it to be bigger. It sounds like this is something that there's still a lot of people taking a traditional approach to it.
Right. I mean, this is your whole untapped market opportunity.
That's the 300 million.
300 million. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when you talk about the 300 million patients or consumers that are out there that want Invisalign, and so our challenge or our opportunity is trying to figure out how we connect them to the right doctors who can deliver great outcomes and deliver the smile that the consumers are looking for at the convenience. And that's where I think digital tools make a big difference in trying to tap into that huge untapped market.
Is that untapped market mostly younger people who are comfortable with all of these new technologies? Is this more of a play for millennials and the next generation than it is for Gen Xers and boomers?
I wouldn't quite say that, because I think adults are equally interested in having a great smile, like it transforms their lives. They also have disposable income to be able to spend. I mean, it really truly makes a difference in how great the self-esteem is. And, you're smiling in all the pictures. And so there's a large adult orthodontics market that we have that is also untapped. I think adults follow millennials in terms of the kind of tools, when computers came along and now phones came along, and they're everywhere. Just the mobile tools, they might not be on social as much, but the mobile tools are what you need to be able to get the convenience of the digital technologies or digital tracking and treatment options out there.
Tell me how you enable all of this with the way you have IT organized. What is the size and the scope of your IT group, both in the U.S. and around the world, and how do you have the responsibilities divided up?
Right. So I have a consumer and a customer team, and that technology team is constantly looking at, sorry, my power. I have to keep getting up and down, it looks like, every few minutes. So I have a consumer and a customer team that is looking at front-facing technologies that's built around more agile processes. And then I have a global enterprise team that is looking at platforms like identity management and ERP and manufacturing systems, where you want a lot of standardization around compliance, global, just the security. As data gets more democratized, things like GDPR come in, and all the countries are coming up with their own data governance rules. So I don't know how long this whole enterprise platform strategy of staying central will hold, but I'll keep it as it is. And the consumer teams are actually very spread out. So that's where the global and the regional comes in, so that the regional teams can use global platforms for consumers and customers and scale and move as rapidly as possible.
Okay.
So those are my two teams, and we have a global infrastructure team. That's also, but we have people in every country that are basically running a 24/7, manufacturing operations, customer operations. And, the nature of the business model is such that we have to be up 24/7, 365 days, because there is a doctor somewhere in some part of the world treating a patient, and everything has to be on. So even though we think that we have a global infrastructure team, it's basically spread out. The team is basically spread out around many different parts of the world. And And so when we look at my org structure, we are continuously thinking about ways where, the foundation principles around keeping it simple, allowing regional teams to go to market as fast as they can, allowing enterprise teams to stay as compliant as possible, and letting the infrastructure, whether it's moving to the cloud or automation or, as we hire and grow more, even onboarding and offboarding has taken on a life of its own around how fast we can get the employees to be productive, day one, hour one, when they start. And you want to have standard processes as much as possible in those areas.
Okay. Well, and let's circle back around to talk about the Customer Journey Week. You and I we had our event in Silicon Valley in July, and I was trying to get you onto the stage to talk about Align, and instead we got your VP. One of your VPs came instead, but you were tied up with the Customer Journey Week, and this was a very big deal. This involved 25 plus, 35 plus executives at the company. I've heard about CIOs, of course, going out and spending time with the customers, but this seemed like a much bigger, more organized attempt to just get out there in the market. So tell me about that.
Right. We understand that, delivering solutions to the customers, making sure that we can integrate with what they do with their practices, and the more you go visit them, the more you learn about what's happening. I cannot sit here. I can sort of visualize what happens in the practice, but it's nothing like being in the doctor's office, hearing from them directly about how the technology shifts are impacting their practices and their industry. And so we make a lot of attempt to make sure that we have many different forms of listening to them and making sure that we integrate their voice into all of the products and the solutions we build. Okay. That's like given in our, it's every day. Whether you're listening to customer care calls, whether you're reviewing data to look for patterns around ease of use, or how they use their tools that we build out, what are the gaps in solutions that we have in this end-to-end digitization journey. It's very helpful to watch them do that in their own practices and to come back to sort of the headquarters and figure out, when you're designing solutions, how do you integrate that knowledge on a daily basis?
Yeah. Well, you'd mentioned that this isn't just dropping in a dentist's office. You would actually, groups of you would get together at certain times in the week to have almost town halls where you discussed customer feedback. Yeah.
And so the good thing is that we listen, we hear a lot of it, we bring it back, we take actions, we make it meaningful, and the doctors appreciate it, and all our employees actually appreciate it. They love the fact that our tools that they are building, from an engineering perspective, are being utilized so well or not. And, from an adoption perspective, 100% adoption of everything that you build out is like nirvana for all engineering.
Well, sure.
And so when you get that feedback directly from the doctors, good or bad, it's very meaningful in what we do every day.
Well, and you mentioned too that I think it's with your consumer group, you do a lot of work in an agile kind of fashion. Yeah. And those agile project teams, depending on how you have it set up, they usually have people from the business involved, and they require a certain amount of customer input up front.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like agile development and just the approaches to it have driven greater business collaboration for the IT organization, more so than any other process or technology that I've seen in a while. Yeah. Is that your feeling about it too? As business collaboration levels, have they changed a lot because of the agile approaches?
Right. If you look at all the emerging technologies that have come up, and all of those technologies, I would like to say that the lines between the business and IT is blurring so fast, because you cannot be in sales or marketing or manufacturing and not understand the basics of what technology can provide. Yes. When you're looking at, especially if you want to drive innovation, you want to know what technologies are out there that can drive the marketplace, that can even drive different business models, especially when you have such untapped market potential out there. And it's the same for the technology engineers as well, because there is no point of being a technologist without figuring out how that technology can enable the business to scale rapidly, again, to come up with maybe different kinds of data models. How data can influence different business models and different ways of how you engage with the doctors and how it help the doctors engage with their patients and all of that stuff. It's like, so if you sit in a meeting at Align, it's very hard to identify who's business, who's IT, because everybody's talking each other's language. And I think the way I have reached a point where it's like, when you're setting up program teams or when you're coming up with agile teams, it's about what skill sets do each bring to the table and is it complementary enough? I rarely look at whether, what function are they from, I want everybody to play their position, but eventually when you come up with a solution, it's very collaborative, it plays to their strengths, and you want to have people with different kinds of specialized skill sets, but with sort of generalized thought process.
Okay, well, that makes sense. I wanted to also ask you, after this customer journey week and the visiting and all of that feedback, when you come back to the office and, now it's the following week, what kind of impact does that have or did it have on your technology priorities? Do you come back from any of those journeys where you think, okay, we really need to do this differently, or I need to launch a program around that? Was there any sort of definitive follow-up that you did?
Right. And I have done many of these kinds, in different formats and different versions.
Sure.
And the first feeling that you get is this aha moment where some of the simplest, some of the biggest problems that the doctors have the simplest solutions in technology. And it's always like, oh my God, like how come we didn't figure this out? Like how did we not commercialize this better? How did we not build a solution that integrates into their practice better? So you sort of feel like really like, oh, we could have done this better. Like you're like, and then you sort of get into the practicality of, okay, so at least, going forward, you're going to learn from, it's not sort of mistakes, but sort of opportunities that exists around, how, as you move from analog to digital, there's a lot of change management involved. Doctors are adopting technologies at a different pace. And, when you're trying to build solutions that are sort of, same for everyone across, you sort of, you have to figure out, okay, is there a simplified version of this for doctors who are non-tech savvy but trying to get there? Is there complexity, or is it too simple for doctors who are tech savvy? And what is that middle ground is something that you think about the week after you come back. After you've gotten over, I can't believe that we didn't solve that problem and how simple it is, right?
Well, I remember years ago, I heard an expression about that the ultimate goal of marketing was to deliver to customers something they never knew they always wanted, and that was the goal for marketing. I think increasingly today, that's the goal for IT. For technology executives and leaders to essentially bring something to the table, and it might be something obvious like a use of a messaging app in a particular business situation, but to bring that to the table from the difference of a technology viewpoint and say, well, here's something you may not have realized you needed, and by the way, we have it. And
and like from an IT perspective, it's like the best place to be, right? Like, like I like to think that we are sort of the central nervous system, because you have visibility into every aspect of the business.
Yes.
Whether it is consumers converting into patients at the doctor's offices, what kind of doctor tools that we can provide, clinical outcomes, engagement tools, and then you move the spectrum along finance, manufacturing, sales operations. I mean, you can go on and on about all of the different aspects that you have visibility to, and the amount of data that you have that you can now inform the business about how they can make it actionable. Yeah, we have like the best seat at the table to be able to inform the rest of the business executives who are very focused on running their portions of the business.
Yes,
and this cross-functional view, especially in the digitized world, is becoming extremely important. And IT is a great place to be
Yes. Oh, well, I could not agree more. I think that's absolutely true. But that whole notion that, we're here from IT and we're really here to help. I think that actually has more traction now in a lot of businesses.
Yeah.
When we were talking about providing the global platforms that are very suitable for regional adapting, what are some of the lessons that you learned along the way of that? One of the things you mentioned, of course, was the predictability for the clinical outcomes. But I wondered in areas like 3D printing or getting things going in production where IT is very involved. What are some of the learnings, I guess, you took away from that as you were setting that up?
From a global governance perspective,
Yes.
Like I said, from just the basics. So everything that you mentioned, for example, are all in the transformation bucket.
Yes.
Where you want some structure, you want some ROI for the investment you're making. You want to be sure that research is truly research, technology feasibility. You are able to get past some of the disruptive technologies that you want to play in, and then at some point you want that experimentation phase to be able to scale as well. And that's where some of the governance processes around global and regional customer inputs into how those technologies can be commercialized come into play.
Okay.
So our marketing and product development functions take a look. So from how the teams are set up, a lot of regional customer input comes into the product definitions.
Excellent.
And it's the same thing around technology platforms. I can build a WhatsApp solution that does not work in China. I have to build an equivalent WeChat solution. I can have an AWS solution that does not work in China. And different commerce platforms are prevalent in different areas of the world.
Yes.
Like, Latin America is on a different commerce platform. Like the number 1, 2s, and 3s Amazon is there everywhere. But how people pay, how insurance works is very different country to country. Yes. And hence all your engagement tools that you have to build in, or the products or the services that we build, have to take into account all of those regional customer needs as well.
Excellent.
So the input phase is extremely important. The technology feasibility phase is also extremely important in how we get feedback from the customers into building those.
Okay. Well, and underlying all of this is, especially in this digital transformation and the way you've been scaling around the world, there's a great deal of innovation work, of IT innovation. What is your approach to supporting and encouraging innovation? It is just usually whenever I talk with CIOs, the 3 biggest topics of interest are leadership, innovation, and business strategy. And we've talked a lot about Align's business strategy. So let's switch hats and talk about the CIO as the leader for the innovation effort. What is it you do to spark more of it?
We like to think that innovation, it's not an event. Like, it's part of the everyday routine. That's where I aim to be on a daily basis.
Yeah.
So, when like we have our idea boards, we have our hackathons, those are processes that continue. But I think for me, what's really important is, day to day, whether you're working on keep the lights on programs or growth programs or transformation, from the entire spectrum, that when you're coming up with a solution, there's always a desire for short-term, I want to test and learn and experiment. And so I'm going to put something together, or I'm going to hack something together. And then I'm constantly asking, okay, how does this short term translate to medium term? I'm still experimenting, but now I'm able to scale.
Yeah.
And the kind of, so that's where I would like to think that it's built into the DNA. It's been part of the company DNA, even on a broader aspect. And then in IT, it's just daily routine. All of my meetings with all of my teams, I'm always figuring out, okay, what's the one thing that you're going to do differently? If you're doing more of the same, we might be in a great spot today, but tomorrow I can guarantee it won't last. And so what are some of the things that you're going to do differently for tomorrow?
Yeah.
So just asking those questions on a daily basis in every meeting that you're in. I think part of, like I said, the culture is such that The teams are also thinking about it, which is really good.
Yes.
While making sure that, because we're sort of experimenting all the time about what works and what doesn't, that we don't lose that innovation in short term as well as medium term thinking.
Well, that willingness to do some disruption.
Yes.
You have to be able to work it in. Well, you mentioned it too. I think of it as the Valley Challenge. I mean, the fact that you're centered in San Jose and you're a 22-year-old company, which in Valley years makes you about 100 years old, right? And you said you don't want to become a legacy company, that you want to stay ahead of what digital tech is doing, and that means a lot of experimenting on product.
Yes. Yeah.
Yep.
No, I mean, that's all true. And that's why I said, we don't want to think of it as an event. We'll do hackathons, we'll collect all the ideas that are coming in, but day-to-day decision making around how we build solutions drives innovation.
Okay. Now, I know you do a lot of thinking out a few years because you've got, we talked about this, you've got lots of people that on your senior leadership team who are taking care of the day-to-day, the month-to-month, even the next year or two, and that you like to think 2 to 4 to 5 years out.
Yeah.
How do you fuel that part of your mind? How do you keep yourself kind of on that leading edge while, of course, still having to do your day job?
Right. I think being in the Silicon Valley has its advantage in that respect. You're running into venture capitalists all the time. You want to understand, I try to understand what technologies they're investing in,
Yep.
And then you also have a whole bunch of innovative CIOs, all of them trying to crack this digitization, digital market opportunities, the different kinds of business models and services that they can enable their own companies to get into. And, our conversations in that space are always very entertaining.
Yeah.
And, we all are very opinionated, to say the least. We all want to place the bets on technologies that we think are going to be successful. While I wouldn't say that we're sort of bleeding edge, we want to be cutting edge in a few areas that really enable Align, like I said, in a few areas where, we can deliver predictable, high quality clinical outcomes, how we allow doctors and patients to engage with each other in really meaningful ways that help both of them get to the treatment that they desire.
Okay.
How do we take this untapped market opportunity that is there around the world and get the smiles that they want? And that transformation needs a lot of newer thinking. Sometimes it's also not even the newer technologies that make a difference. Technology hardly has a role as much as, how do I build digital discipline into the architecture? Every dollar that I spend on a daily basis, I'm asking, okay, how does this further our own digitalization along? Align as a company, and then dentistry as an industry as a whole. And so that sort of thinking is also equally important. And I think technology, if you just look at these, the visualization technologies play a very important role for us. The scanning technologies have played an important role for us. Data science is playing a very important role. And then just that's where, listening to your peers out here, listening to VCs around investments, listening to where security and compliance regulations are working around the world, how governments are thinking, and how technology can actually help us scale and meet the compliance needs. All of those things come from just looking outward.
Right. Well, I remember when we talked about this originally, I was assuming that for a business like Align, 3D printing would be a huge deal for Align. But from what you told me, a lot of it is not, it's not enterprise ready, essentially, in terms of delivering those predictable outcomes. It's not a huge part of what you're doing in the manufacturing process.
So we are investing a lot of it in research and scalability right now. And that's part of the manufacturing engineering process. So we want to be leaders in 3D printing. In fact, when we talk about manufacturing 330,000 plus unique aligners a day, it's a form of 3D printing. And we see a lot of opportunity in how we can scale that digitally as well. And there's a lot of effort inside the company to be leaders at that.
Yeah. And do The offices you visit when you go to dentists, do many of them have 3D printers already? Are they interested in this area of technology, or do they look at you like they don't know what you're talking about?
No, they're very interested. In fact, I think almost all of them believe that it's transformative to their practices.
Okay. Okay.
And so from our perspective, for the opportunity from an Align perspective is we're already leaders in making custom personalized aligners, and we want to stay ahead. And the doctors are looking to us to lead the way. So it's a great place to be.
Okay. Well, and you had mentioned data science. Everyone's always interested in the data aspects. And I wanted to ask a little bit more about machine learning and the AI aspects. What parts of your IT organization are most deeply into that right now? What sort of things are you able to do because of machine learning?
So we invested a lot of it around clinical outcomes, which was a great area that all stakeholders, doctors, consumers, Align, we're all interested in delivering really high quality outcomes. And we like to buy technology platforms that today, whether you look at Salesforce, SAP, even the enterprise platforms are all building AI and machine learning and data science into their tool sets. So we are constantly looking for ways about how we take the learnings that we have had from our own experience around driving predictable outcomes into the business operations side, around sales and marketing, around this big, large, untapped market opportunity, how we are able to convert and engage the consumers and go to the doctors asking for Invisalign and get the treatment that they need. That's all the areas where we want to use machine learning and predictive modeling.
Okay. And are there other cutting edge or leading edge technologies that you're particularly interested or watching closely? Blockchain, for instance. Just about every industry seems to have some sort of experimentation going on with blockchain.
Right. So we are watching it very closely. We know for that, just from a records perspective, the digital records have a very high propensity towards being blockchained.
Yeah.
And I think the opportunity where you can come up with and it also offers the patient an opportunity to have their records security, like they own, if it's a private blockchain, they can manage their own privacy of their records. And when you stitch all of these blocks of records together, whether it is, you're scanning every time you come into your daily practice to your financial information around insurance and the kind of treatments you have had in the past. I think there is a great opportunity for the doctors to stitch all of the blocks together to come up with what's working for the patient, what works for their dentition, and how they can set up their future treatments even better. So we're watching it, and we'll watch it very closely. Like I said, because we want to be innovators of all the digitization of dentistry as a whole. Yeah, it's a really good area for us to keep an eye on.
Is robotics another area that you watch with any particular interest?
It has always been part of us, especially for the scale of manufacturing that we need to do. So it's always been part of the manufacturing engineering DNA. So the part that I'm interested in is, what I'm calling it digital IT. The word robotics, process automation is becoming it's talked about a lot these days. And, whether it is looking at all the events that the machines are generating, or whether that's the amount of standardization as you're replicating servers around the world. I think there is a lot of opportunity around digital IT and process automation in general that we would be looking at next year.
All right, good. And let's also talk about talent, because acquiring and retaining talent is always in the top 3 of what CIOs are thinking about. And you mentioned that you were telling your team the other day, you're so busy trying to make sure the digital journeys of your dentists and your patients are going well, but it's also important to have some internal focus on your own digitizing and scaling. So talk about talk about how you attract talent and how you also make sure that the kind of tools and the internal workings for IT at Align are just as exciting as they are for your customers.
Right. So that's a big selling point for us in attracting talent. And, we like to still keep ourselves nimble. So small teams, small agile teams, tons of transformation work, no matter which function you look at. And the company, because innovation is in the DNA and it's technology that is trying to adapt to enable that rapid scaling, there's opportunity for all different kinds of skill sets. And, because we have a learning culture and we also have a growth mindset, it's very attractive for talent to look at Align in the middle of every other company that is equally attractive to everyone. So we try to create that sort of an advantage around how we can enable and how adaptable the talent is. We look at multidisciplinary skills, which I think is very important. While there is room for specialized skills, the kind of skills that we allow people to develop, they might start off in an area in a particular technology, but the ability for them to grow laterally and to learn different technologies and to grow with the company is huge. And we actually encourage that. Like, I'm a prime example of someone who started off in product development, engineering, and moved on to business operations, running IT. And, those are all the opportunities that just allow for talent growth. And that's how we can attract talent.
Yes.
And we have a very engaged leadership to allow that to happen too.
Do you also have intern programs or things you do directly with colleges to bring in the brand new talent?
So we have an intern program. So usually summertime is the best time to get a lot of interns.
Yes.
We put them in a lot of emerging technologies. We put them in lots of areas where, we can experiment and it's okay to fail. And learn from the speed at which the millennials come in. And it's also a good way to learn about what they expect in a workforce and in a workplace. There's just a lot of benefits of having a good intern program. And we work really well in IT to get a lot of good interns. While they are developing their own skills, we are also learning a lot from them.
Well, CIOs always, the ones I talk to always seem very interested in the attitudes and the mindsets of the millennial developers and, these young people in their early 20s coming in. What are some of the things as a manager and a leader inside the company, what do you notice about the millennial talent in terms of the areas they're interested in, what keeps them engaged? What have you learned from watching them?
The interesting part is, so they are all very aware, and I think this is where the colleges are doing a good job about integrating digital technologies into the curriculum. So in the emerging technology space, they are all well-versed. They talk about automated deployments the time they walk in.
Yeah.
When you say you have manual configurations, they look at us like we are ancient.
It's like asking them to use a handset instead of a cell phone.
So when it comes to like voice, data science, vision, any of the engagement experiences, they're all like really, like it just comes very naturally to them.
Okay.
The part where we really struggle with talent in general is, in enterprise technologies, right? Like you're not trained on Salesforce, you're not trained on SAP. Identity management, like even if it's a homegrown system on open source platforms, is something that you have to train engineers on.
Yes.
So I think part of it is just making sure that from a growth mindset and the learning mindset, that they are able to bring the newer technology space, and we somehow build a workforce that is available for rest of the enterprise and platform technologies.
Okay. Excellent. Great answer. And my last question for you, well, as we wrap up here, will be when you think about the IT organization of the future and the sort of skill sets that CIOs are looking for now and the sort of the way the labor will divide up, what are the most important skills that you think that young IT professionals can bring into the ones who are, maybe watching and listening to this and thinking, I'd like to be a CIO someday. What are some of the skill sets that we need in that future IT organization as we roll forward? Because transformation is never going to end, and change management is never going to be resolved. It's just sort of a rolling forward transformation.
Right. As much as technology skills are important, I think you can train them on it, right? You can teach them, how to write algorithms and data science and, platform tech, how to configure platforms. The biggest thing that they have to have is adaptability. When you're looking at multidisciplinary skills as what is going to take you to the next level, you want to be today I'm working on this technology. Tomorrow I'm going to be working on that part of the business. And day after tomorrow, it's going to be something else. I mean, it's just that the technology innovation is so, the pace at which it's moving, the adaptability is so important. And the change management of your own personal career is also equally important. And it's never going to be one thing. I think when we started off, it was like, if I knew enterprise systems, I could become a CIO. Or if I was more customer facing, I could become a CIO. Today, you have to know technology. I cannot be in this job if I didn't know technology enough.
Right.
And I also have to understand the business strategy enough to figure out how technology can enable that. And to me, technology is so broad these days that the consumer technologies are very different from security technologies, very different from enterprise technologies. And in a company, everybody knows IT. Everybody knows technology these days.
They think they do because of the phone in their hand. Everybody thinks they could be a CIO.
Right. And you just have to be better at it, better than everyone else in all aspects, which means you have to be really adaptable and really embrace change as it comes along.
Excellent. Well, I think that's a wonderful answer. And it's been terrific talking to you today, Sri. I really appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. This has been fun.
Yes. Well, I told you it would be. Everybody comes into this a little nervous. I was like, it's just a conversation.
Right.
Okay. So if you're joining us late and you want to watch this full episode, you can find it posted tomorrow at CIO.com. And the audio podcast from my conversation with Sri Kohli will be available on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and SoundCloud. And I hope you will plan on joining us for our next episode of CIO Leadership Live, which will be on Monday, October 29th at 1 p.m. Eastern. And I'll be joined by Bask Iyer, who is the CIO of VMware. So thank you very much for joining us today, and we'll see you again next time.